So I'm absolutely joined by Dougie on my podcast. Dougie, how are you doing?
Yeah, really great. Thanks. Thanks for having me on. It's a real honour and privilege, Jay.
It's a pleasure to have you on. First of all, give us a bit of an insight and background on when your love for football first began.
Oh, Jay, my love of football began from literally as far back as I can remember. My father was a professional footballer. He was a Tottenham schoolboy, then went on to Wolves, played for Crystal Palace, finished up his career at Barnet. So from as soon as I can remember, my whole family loved. They introduced me to football at a very, very early age. I think my first game was a Barnet fixture because my dad went back as like a former legend or former hero. So that was the first game that I went to see, but I can vaguely remember that. And then my dad used to take me to all my dad's side of the family is Spurs fans. All my mum's side are Arsenal fans. But yeah, he took me to Arsenal Man United at Highbury, and I fell in love with Highbury. Magical place. And just, yeah, I was an Arsenal fan ever since, and I don't think my dad's ever forgiven me.
Absolutely. Have you got any fun stories from growing up, from supporting football and Arsenal?
Well, yeah, I have actually. So my father, when he stopped playing, he was at the end of his career at Barnet. He became good friends with, and the Fry family are great friends to this day with my family. My dad used to work for Barry at Birmingham City and then Peterborough as a scout. And that was just phenomenal, Jay. Like as a kid, like that was when I was about 10, 11, 12. And as a kid, being in that environment and being in changing rooms at that age. And at the time, Birmingham had an amazing squad. There was like players like Kevin Francis, Ricky Otto, Paul Tate, and just Jose Dominguez. Just incredible experience to be able to grow up in that environment and be around the training ground and in the changing rooms. And just a couple of funny incidents in the time at Birmingham. Jose Dominguez, which hopefully a few of your listeners will know of. He was a tiny little Portuguese winger, and he had size 4 football boots. And I remember they were playing away at Oxford's old ground, the county ground, and I was going to be the mascot in the evening. It was an evening game, week game, and I was the mascot. And I'll never forget Barry Fry ringing my mum up and saying, "Well, what size football boots is Dougie?" And my mum was like, "Oh, he's size 4. Oh, brilliant. Jose's forgot his boots and we haven't got time to go back and get them. He's got no boots. He's going to have to wear Dougie's boots." So I turn up at the stadium and there's massive panic getting the boots to Jose. And then I've had to go out onto the pitch in Chris White's boots, and he was a size 11. So I'm a size 4. He was a size 11. So I'm on the pitch before the game with these massive canoes on my feet, and all I remember was Barry coming onto the pitch before the game throwing headers because I couldn't run around and I couldn't kick the ball because the boots kept coming off. So they got beat that night, so the boots didn't do anyone any favours. But that was one funny story, and it was just a magical time. Yeah, like growing up in that environment and being able to experience that was phenomenal.
I know Barry Fry's been exceptional with Peterborough United. For me, when I think of Barry Fry, I think of the great recruitment and transfers he's done over the years from the likes of Connor Washington, George Boyd. More recently, got the likes of Ivan Toney, other players like that. Peterborough have always had a great eye for recruitment. Obviously, Leo Da Silva Lopes, the most obvious one, considering you're someone he represents. I know we'll get more into that later on. So, what is your kind of thoughts on Barry and how's he influenced you and your career?
Well, I love characters in life. I love people with big personalities, and there's no one with a bigger personality than Barry Fry. I genuinely don't think he gets enough credit for the money that he's made in the last 10 years. It's just unbelievable. He's the best in the business at it. And I was surprised actually a few years back that maybe a bigger club didn't want him to be director of football because it'd be an absolute no-brainer. He makes profit. He buys untapped talent and they end up going for fortune. So yeah, he's always been amazing. And I think from my perspective, in pre-seasons, Barry's family lived close to my family in Bedfordshire, and I'd drive up to Birmingham with Barry, and he'd be going 120 miles an hour down the motorway, and he'd be on phone non-stop, and I'd be hearing the phone calls on loudspeaker, and I think that maybe gave me an early insight into wheeling and dealing and knowing how deals operate and how to maximise them to your advantage.
Absolutely, and it is learning from the best. Barry Fry is outstanding. And I know you mentioned in your story of Jose and your size 4 boots, you mentioned playing on the pitch, headers on the pitch. And I believe you used to play as well, playing for Stevenage in your younger days. Can you more on that and expand during your time at Stevenage?
Yeah, so I was lucky. I joined Stevenage when I was 16, and he's still one of my closest friends to this day, George Boyd, and I played alongside George at Stevenage between 16 and 18. But without this turning into a podcast of a sob story, I suffered a lot with injuries. I had massive problems and operations on my shins, and I was never ever fit for a long period of time. And I'd go and see so-called specialists, all the top specialists, and they'd always diagnose what the problem was at that moment in time. So I'd had shin splints, so they operate on my shins. I'd have problems with my quads, my hamstrings, and everyone was always focusing on what that issue was at that given time, and instead of actually trying to find out what the root cause was. And it wasn't until years later that Paul Ankers, who's an amazing guy, back specialist, he looked at my spine and realised that there was a massive problem at the bottom of my spine. And if I'd have seen Paul when I was 15, I think maybe it'd have been a different story football-wise. I was lucky that after Stevenage, I joined Team Bath, and I don't know how much you know about Team Bath, but it was fantastic. So we had an amazing team, amazing setup. Paul Tisdale was the coach, who went on to coach Exeter City. It was a phenomenal setup. Back in that time, it was 13 years ago, and the sports training village at Bath was better than most Premier League's training grounds. The facilities were phenomenal. We'd have the England rugby team training with us. We'd have Olympic swimmers, Colin Jackson. So you're in an environment where you're seeing all these world-class athletes, and it was really, really inspiring. And Bath's a fantastic city, and just, it was a great period. But again, sadly, injuries dogged my time there.
Obviously, it's a massive shame that you never really got the chance to kick on as a footballer due to your injury problems. But in a lot of people's opinions, you went on to do the next best thing in terms of you actually worked for Sky Sports News as a producer and a reporter for 10 years. So can you expand a little bit on your pathway to becoming a producer and reporter at Sky Sports News?
So when I left Team Bath, I wanted to get back to London because I've always been in and around London my whole life, and I'm a London boy at heart. And I was lucky that straight away I got an opportunity to do a week's work experience at Sky Sports. And Sky Sports News first aired when I was 12 years of age. And I always remember saying to my parents and my family, wow, if I never make it as a footballer, I want to work at Sky Sports News. I just thought it was incredible. I've never seen, obviously no one in this country had ever seen anything like it, 24-hour sports news service. And I just watch it religiously. I was, the word gets overused nowadays, but I was obsessed. And so when it wasn't going to happen for me football-wise, I was lucky enough, I got the week's work experience at Sky Sports. And I thought, right, I'm going to maximise this because I don't want to do anything else in life. This is what I want to do at this moment in time. I was 21, and I'd make sure at Sky I was in an hour early and I'd be finishing an hour later. I made sure that I introduced myself to everyone, and people would call it being busy, and I would absolutely agree with them. I couldn't have been any busier. And I loved that Sky, they would let you, each day you'd be in a different department. So you'd be working on the boxing department, and then the football department, and then the golf, tennis, cricket, everything. So you got to meet pretty much everyone within the whole of Sky Sports. And I just absolutely loved my week there.
It's absolutely amazing to hear about that and that experience you had. You must have had some great stories from over the years working at Sky Sports News. There's so many great.
Yeah, well, I've been very, very fortunate. I was at Sky Sports, so just to give you a little bit of background. So at the end of my week's work experience at Sky Sports, on the last hour, I went and spoke to the big boss in Sky Sports News, Andy Cairns, and I said, Andy, I've been lucky that I've had an opportunity to do a week's work experience in Sky Sports, but I'd love to be able to do a week's work experience in Sky Sports News because that's always been the place that I want to be. And he very kindly arranged that for me. So I did a week's work experience there. And then at the end of that week's work experience, I went and approached Andy and said, thank you again. I can't thank you enough. It's been amazing. If there's ever a job, I'm happy to work for free. If there's any opportunities, please, can you let me know? And I was so lucky. That finished on the Friday afternoon. And then on the Tuesday, the assistant to Andy, the second in command, he went and offered me a job. So I was very, very fortunate. But I would say, and for the younger guys out there listening who want to go on to maybe work in media, if you get an opportunity, grasp it. And I definitely did grasp it.
I think that's a really important piece of advice because at the moment, the sport media industry is probably as competitive as it's ever been. There's a lot of jobs, well, not a lot of jobs at the moment, but there's a lot of people asking about those jobs. How would you recommend for students who are watching this to make themselves stand out to people like Sky Sports News and companies like that?
I would just say be super professional. Go the extra mile. So the extra mile for me was making sure that I was polite. I introduced myself to everyone so I would be memorable. Self in the company's position, and they've got hundreds and hundreds of people getting the opportunity to have work experience. Maybe they'll have 200 people a year between Sky Sports and Sky Sports News having work experience. So you need to stand out from the crowd. So get in an hour earlier, finish an hour later, offer yourself up to do anything and everything, and just really put yourself out there.
Absolutely, and it's paid massive dividends for yourself. Throughout years at Sky Sports News, you must have met some incredible people. Who would you say is up there on the best footballers you've interviewed, or sportsmen or women?
Well, I was very, very lucky. Yeah, so I was there for a total of 10 years. I started off in a production team to begin with, and I had a great boss called Will Green, and he's a close friend of mine now, and I absolutely love him to bits. And anyone that can put up with me for 10 years he's got to be a good guy. So yeah, he was fantastic. But I worked my way up from production juniors. I started with printing scripts and making coffees and teas for the presenters, and I'd always make sure that I'd make awful coffees and teas because I didn't want to do and that's a surefire way to be.
I think everyone's done that. I think everyone's done that in some work environment. If you make a bad cup of tea, you don't get asked again.
No. And then when I finally did my work experience as a kid at school, I did it at Peterborough United. And I remember making Barry and Wayne Turner, who was the assistant at the time, I made them a cup of coffee. And I'd never made a cup of coffee in my life. And I genuinely did not have a clue how to make one. And I remember putting like 5 little teaspoons of coffee in. And I'll always remember Wayne's and Barry's face. They like spat out and they're like, Dougie, what the fuck is this? And yeah, I never got asked again. So I made sure I repeated that at Sky and so I didn't get asked. But yeah, in relation to your question, yeah, so I worked my way up in the production team to when I was producing the output and that was fantastic. But I always wanted to be reporting and out meeting people. And I was lucky that I had a great network of people within the game. So Sky wanted to utilize that. So I'd get out to go and do lots of different interviews. And I interviewed Steven Gerrard a couple of times. He kindly let me interview him exclusively at the Mere Golf Course, which is in Cheshire, so, his golf day, and that was brilliant and loved that. I managed to go out to Milan to interview Clarence Seedorf and David Beckham after the Milan derby, and that was just ridiculous experience. Venus Williams, when she was at the top of her game tennis-wise, I interviewed her on a birthday and I took her a birthday cake. And yeah, did everything to suck up, and we got on great and had a really, really good rapport. So I've been extremely lucky. I was doing a lot of Soccer Saturday and Soccer Special games, so I'd be reporting at games with the headphones on and reporting back to Jeff. And just the reporting angle is everything that I wanted to do, and it was just yeah, incredible experience.
I think when a lot of people think of Sky Sports News, they think of one man in particular, and that is Jeff Stelling. Did you have much dealings with him?
Yeah, Jeff's just an amazing guy, really, really good. He's the best in the business. I mean, I cannot explain to you what is going on in his ear sets when he's presenting. There's so much going on and so many live games and so many reporters at games. He just honestly makes it look effortless. He's world class. He's the best. He's the best in the business, and he's a really, really lovely guy as well. So yeah, it was Soccer Saturday, obviously a huge following as a show, and to be able to report on that and be able to report on the soccer specials in the midweek, it was yeah, very, very good.
You mentioned obviously taking a birthday cake to Venus Williams and obviously getting it exclusive with Steven Gerrard. How important is it for when journalists are working in the industry to form personal relationships with players and sportsmen?
Oh, it's vital, Jay. You've got to. So when you go and interview people, I was lucky. People seemed to like me. So, and more importantly, I think people trusted me. So they could tell me stuff confidentially and off the record, and it would never go anywhere. Like I was a closed closed book in that sense. So I built rapport with lots and lots of people within the game, and I managed to utilise those relationships, so that always stood me in good stead.
I think that's the best piece of advice, because when you get told something off the record, the least you owe them for giving the faith in you and telling them is to keep it secret. Obviously, Sky Sports News is one of the biggest media outlets in the world. Obviously, moving forward now with the media industry, how do you think it's changed since you first started in the industry?
Well, in the dark ages, I'll say the dark
The
ages.
dark ages, 10 years ago.
Yeah. Well, 14 years ago when I first started at
Black and white
Sky.
TVs.
I'm not that old, Jay. No, 14 years ago. I know this will sound crazy to people listening, but we used to have like cassettes. So for us to have a running order of stories that went out to air, you'd have to put a cassette into the like tape deck. So you'd put a cassette in, and then the next one and the next one. But this machine was, I think, older than I was at the time. So you'd have to get a pair of scissors. I know it sounds crazy. Pick up the tape with a pair of scissors and then put it into the machine, and just it's just not even like, it's hard to even comprehend now that everything's become digitalized. But it was just bizarre. But I absolutely loved it. We were in an old building at the time, and I loved it because it was very close and there was a camaraderie, and it was like a changing room almost, with like the camaraderie and the team spirit. And we then moved to, after 4 or 5 years of me being at Sky, we moved to like a state-of-the-art building. And don't get me wrong, I know times have got to move on, but I think I'm an old romantic, and I still look back with, I had fonder memories of the old building than I do in their current building. And that's probably the same with Arsenal. Like I still absolutely love Highbury. I'll take Highbury all day, every day over the Emirates.
Yeah, I remember Wigan Athletic played against Arsenal in the last ever game at Highbury. I think it finished 4-2. I think you might know this one more than I. I think I was only young at the time, I think. I'm not rubbing it in, by the way. I'm not rubbing it in.
No, they were great days. The Arsenal team in the last 2 or 3 years at Highbury was just fantastic. With Thierry Henry, Patrick Vieira, Emmanuel Petit, Tony Adams. Just the last few years there were just amazing.
So many great players. I'll never forget Thierry Henry's goal at it was the JJB Stadium back then. A free kick. I think it was about 35 yards out in off the post, and he just stood there waiting for his teammates to come up to him. I think it's one of the most iconic celebrations. You must remember the goal.
Yeah. No, I remember the goal. I love Thierry would do things, and you just stand up and you think, wow. But it might be slightly controversial, but hopefully not too controversial. But the player that I just absolutely loved, well, firstly was Ian Wright, but with Dennis Bergkamp, I could watch Dennis play football all day, because not only was he so technically gifted, he'd do things that I've never seen anyone do before. And I know Thierry would do the same as well because of his pace, and he had a lot of skill and his finishing as well. But I just love Dennis. He's the one that if I ever get a moment and I'm trying to reminisce, I'll go on YouTube and look at Dennis Bergkamp clips. But it was just incredible just to watch those types of players and to see them in action. I was lucky that I used to go an awful lot to Arsenal. I was junior gunner, and I'd get to watch just some of the best players that have ever played the game.
Yeah, his goal against Newcastle was one of the best I've ever seen. The turn was just majestical. I've never seen anything like it, and that's a brilliant solve, Dennis. Moving back onto Sky Sports, because we can talk about Arsenal all day. We can talk about how they're very unlikely to not win a title for a very long time, but we'll look past that. And, at Sky Sports, you mentioned that the camaraderie in the offices, and you must have striked up a lot of good friendships when you was working there.
Oh, so many good relationships with people. They're a fantastic bunch, and I don't want this to come across with Kirsty Gallagher, to this day, Georgie Thompson when I first started at Sky. I'll get in trouble here because if any of them listen and I haven't named them, Dharmesh Sheth, who's one of the best reporters there is, and then obviously people behind the scenes as well. But yeah, I've struck up a lot of really good relationships to this day, and just had so many fun memories when I look back. One incident that went down in folklore at Sky, when I was working, we'd work shift patterns. I'd work for 4 days and then have 4 days off, and we'd start at 3:30 in the morning and finish at midday. And I only lived a mile and a half away from Skye in Twickenham. And I remember one morning I was driving in, and Skye is located just off of a huge crossroads called Gillette Corner. And to just be completely honest, I've gone through a red light because I was running 5 or 6 minutes late. So I've gone through this red light, and you basically go through the big crossing, and then 100 yards up on the right, you turn right, and then Skye's just down that road. So it's literally 30 seconds from the crossroads. So I've gone through a red light, which I apologise for. But it was just it turned red. And I'll never forget a police siren in the background. And I was like, oh no. So I've got to the mini roundabout, turn right, and I'm like, please, will the police just go straight on? But they followed me right, and I thought, oh no. So I've pulled over, and the police officer's come up to the side of my car, and he said, do you know why we pulled you over? And I said, no, officer. And he said, come on, we've got it on camera.
Are they coming back for you now?
No, sorry, that's London. Yeah, I'll be waiting for them to come back for me for a long time, to be honest, Jay. But no. So they said, oh, you need to step into our car. So I walked to their car, got in the back, and they're going through all the details. And they said, can we ask where you're going at this time in the morning? And I said, oh, I work for Sky Sports. And I started work, it's like 15 minutes ago now. And I was running late, and I'm really sorry, officer. I really apologise. And they asked me for my insurance details, and the guy turns around to me, and one of the police officers turns around to me and says, oh, it's not coming up with insurance records. I said, no, 100, I'm with Privilege Insurance, 100%, I've got insurance. And they said, oh, so what do you do for Sky? And they started going down the Sky route. So I thought, oh, here's a chance. So I said, oh, why don't you come into Sky, and I'll show you around. I can show you where Soccer AM's filmed. I can, like the presenters will be in a little while. I can maybe introduce you to them. So I remember they looked at each other, and I could see them mulling it over. And I said, oh, go on, you'll really love it. So they said, oh, okay, great. So I get back out of their car and get into my car, and the police follow me into Sky. And I'll never forget my production team's faces when I walked in through the back of the building with these two police officers. And it was like 25 minutes late now. And Will and Kim, my two bosses, they were like, Dougie, what's going on? I said, oh, listen, long story. Like, let me come back to you. But bear in mind, it's like 10 to 4 in the morning. They're thinking, what the hell is going on here? So I gave them a quick 20-minute tour of the whole of Sky Sports, came back, and they said, thank you so much. That's been amazing. Thank you for telling us all the stories, etc., etc. We're going to let you off. And I was like, oh, I'm so grateful. That's very, very kind. Anyway, I showed them out, came back, told my production team the story, and they're in like fits of laughter. They couldn't believe it. And then I ring my dad up at like 7:30 in the morning. I said, Dad, they said, I told him the story. I said, Dad, they told me that I didn't have insurance. I said, but you sort my insurance out, don't you? And he went, Douglas, I've stopped paying for your insurance 2 years ago. So I've been driving without insurance for 2 years. I was like, oh, no. So I was so fortunate that nothing had happened, obviously, and stuff like that. But that was just an amazing story, and that the people still remind me of now. But it was just so many great memories, and so many fantastic things happened that I'll cherish forever.
It's absolutely brilliant, and you've heard it first on the Full-Time Whittle podcast. If you ever want to get out of a driving finer situation, say you work for Sky Sports, and try and get a job there, because that's the way out.
I think I got very, very lucky, but again, I think maybe I'd managed to charm them somehow.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, moving on now in the podcast, you work as a football agent at the moment. Can you explain how you got into that pathway and into that role?
Yeah, well, the first memories, I think, were probably watching Jerry Maguire, the film. And for anyone that's not seen that film, I know it's a Hollywood film, but the core beliefs and the core messages that come from that film I could relate to. And I loved how Tom Cruise plays the agent, and how he just looks after the athlete and takes care of him properly. And that always resonated with me. And I always thought, wow, this is something that interests me. And that was years before I went into it. But I had friends that were still playing within the game, and they'd say to me, oh, Dougie, agents are a disgrace. You can't trust them. There's a market there for you to like come in and be able to do things. So I was helping out some of my friends within the game, just helping them with bits and pieces, helping them with moves. I played with Sean Canham at Team Bath, and I got him a move to Hereford United, and I managed to negotiate a really good contract, and he was like, "Dougie, you're really good at this." And a couple of other friends that I'd done little bits and pieces with had said the same feedback. So I thought, right, and at this point, I've been at Sky 8 years. So I thought, right, I'm going to give this a go. Now, back at that time, you had to do an exam with the Football Association. They'd do 2 dates a year, one in March and one in September. And I can't express to you how tough it was, Jay, to pass. For 2 weeks, I locked myself at home, and it was basically everything on law, international law as well, because when you're moving players, and it was very, very, very tough. So I went and sat the exam in March. I think on the day that I took it, there was 454 people that took the exam, and I think 57 passed. So honestly, it was so tough, and I was very fortunate that I passed the exam, and I then managed to start representing more and more players. And I wanted to keep it low key because I was still at Sky, and obviously I didn't want them to know, and I just wanted to build it up in the background and just keep things low key. But after a year or 2 years, I was in a position where I built up a client base where I felt comfortable that I could make the transition from Sky and become a full-blown agent and do it full-time. I will say, Jay, as well, quickly, mate, on the exam, it is an absolute disgrace that FIFA, 18 months after I passed the exam, they did away with being able to have to. So now, if you wanted to become an agent tomorrow, you could go on the FA website, you pay £500 for a year, you have to pass your CRB checks, which obviously if you've not got a criminal record, you pass that without having to do anything. And you can class yourself as an agent. And I think it's an absolute disgrace, like just how anyone can do what is at times a very, very tough and challenging job, and a job that requires a lot of knowledge with regards to law.
It must be so frustrating for you, which happened so soon after you pass your test, because you worked so hard to get that license, and now you can literally just pay money to get the same accreditation. I just think that's very, very wrong. And obviously, it's credit to yourself for passing that really tough exam. With your work as a football agent, what are your core values when looking after a player?
Honesty, number one, honesty. I'm super honest in everything that I do, and I'd like to think that I'm super honest in how I live my life in general, day to day. So I think when you're transparent with people, I think you give off an energy where people can trust you. And I've been fortunate that a lot of people within the game do trust me, and that's been obviously beneficial to them, and it's been beneficial to me. So I'd say honesty, definitely number one. I think looking at sometimes the bigger picture as well with regards to players and representing them. Like, I want them to have amazing careers. I want them to be the best footballers that they can be. But as important to me, Jay, is they're as good a human being as they can be. And that is vital for me. So I'm lucky that the crop of people that I work with at the moment are great people. I literally love spending time with all of them. I love communicating with them. I love being able to represent them. I feel very honoured and privileged. And I love that I can give them honest feedback in every way, and they take it on board, and they trust me and they listen to me.
Absolutely. Are you allowed to disclose the people you represent on this podcast?
Yeah, without going into huge detail and reeling off a whole wide list, I think the people that appeal to maybe your listeners is Leo Da Silva Lopes. I look after him. I've done a lot of work alongside Paul Cook as well, so I've got a fantastic relationship with Paul. Yeah, they'd be the two that probably resonate most with your viewers and listeners. Yeah,
absolutely, the Wigan connection. And Leo Da Silva Lopes was quite a curious case. I know you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but he signed for Wigan for £1 million from Peterborough, and then obviously he didn't really break into the first team during his spell at the club. He got loaned out to Gillingham before he moved on to Hull, I believe, for 400,000. So, what do you make of his time at the DW Stadium?
Well, this will hopefully be interesting to the listeners with regards to Leo. He was a 19-year-old, and Leo, for anyone that's met him or dealt with him in any capacity, even asked for an autograph, he is a fantastic kid. I absolutely love him to bits. I treat him like family. And he's just a fantastic kid. At 19, though, the move to Wigan, we tried to get him settled as quickly as possible, but sometimes things don't work out. So we tried to buy a property for him, and we ended up he did buy a property, but it took 2.5 months until he could move in. So he was living out of a hotel for 2.5 months. He hadn't passed his driving test at this point. And although people might think, oh, living in a hotel's glamorous, trust me, that novelty wears off after 2 or 3 days. And so being there for 2.5 months, I think just things outside of football maybe didn't help. I think the fitness levels at Wigan at the beginning of pre-season, I think, took Leo by surprise, and it's something that he learned from that experience as well. But by the end of pre-season, he was completely up to speed because he's a naturally fit boy. But I think it was a time to learn lessons, and obviously Paul signed Leo to play, and that's why they paid the money for him, because they could see what fantastic ability he had. But sometimes things don't quite work out. I think Paul would look back and say Leo should probably deserve more of a chance, because for people that were at the Rotherham game, in the League Cup game right at the beginning of the season, they played him right back and he was the best player, not just for Wigan, he was the best player on the pitch. And then I think just little circumstances worked against him. There was a time where he was absolutely flying, and he was due to, I think they were playing Leeds at home on Saturday, he was due to play, and then he was like violently ill in the days leading up to it. So just little circumstances and little things didn't quite work out, and that sometimes happens in life. And I think Leo learned a lot from that period of time, and I think he's like an even better human than he was for going through those challenges.
I think it definitely taught him a lot moving forward and helped him grow stronger. I'm glad you mentioned the Rotherham game. It was in the League Cup, and I was at that game. It was a really cold night in August, I believe. Yeah. And he was outstanding, and he was so quick, agile, was beating his man every time. And I think he settled James Vaughan's goal. I might be wrong on that one, but he was outstanding, and it just shows how much of a part luck plays in football, because if he weren't so violently ill before the Leeds United game, it could have been a different story for Leo at Wigan Athletic.
Yeah, and I tend not to look back too much. You can learn lessons from those periods, but it's always about learning those lessons and then using those lessons to move you forward in life. And it didn't work. It didn't quite work out at Wigan, and there's no animosity. Like Paul, obviously I've got a great relationship with Paul, and there was no animosity there at all. I just think just slight things didn't quite go for him. And I think sometimes it's quite easy as a fan to go, oh, we paid this money, it didn't work out, and oh, why hasn't this happened and why hasn't that happened? But I think sometimes you maybe don't appreciate things that are going on off the pitch.
Absolutely. And I think it is a really important aspect, especially in terms of a player's mental health. In terms of safeguarding footballers, do you look at a footballer's finance as well and help him on that side of things?
Yeah, Jay, I try and help them in all aspects, if just being completely honest with you. And finance is one of those that I'm particularly strong on. There's been well-documented examples of players that have retired and have bankrupt. They've had to declare themselves bankrupt because they've run out of money. And one of the things that I made sure when I started out in this game was I was going to make sure any player that I represent is always going to be financially sound, and they're always going to look after their money. So it's a big factor for me when looking after people. And yeah, I'm 6 years into doing this now, and all my players are very, very sound financially. They listen to me from the second I start representing them, even as young as age 15, 16, when I'm allowed to represent them. I tell them straight away, you need to be putting a percentage away and saving it. And as far as I'm aware, and I'm pretty hot on it and keep up to date with things, as far as I'm aware, they've all been brilliant in this aspect.
I think that's absolutely amazing to hear, and it's great to see football's being looked after at that element. Today, when we're releasing the podcast, it is deadline day. Would you be able to disclose and explain how a transfer works on like an inside view that fans don't necessarily see?
Jay, there's so many ways a transfer can come about, and they can come about in a flash. There can be a transfer like just to bring up Leo again, the transfer for him to go from Hull to Bruges, Cercle Bruges as a club record transfer fee, that took me 2 months to get over the line. Whereas other deals can happen in, honestly, 24 hours. So they can happen in a number of ways. They can happen because an agent has a relationship with the club. The manager has a relationship with an agent. The club speak to different agents and say, this is the type of player we're looking for. And then the agent suggests players. And there's a whole host of reasons how a transfer can happen. There can be a domino effect, which is what you'll see a lot today, where one player moves. So then if that player moves, then this player can join. And there'll be a whole domino effect probably throughout the Premier League on transfer deadline day to day as a result of one person moving. And equally, if one person doesn't move, then that can have a knock-on effect for other moves that you thought were going to happen and haven't happened because of a move 5 pieces down the line.
I think it's absolutely fascinating how things can change so quickly in football, especially on deadline day. It's probably the most manic day in your calendar, without a doubt, in terms of the amount of movement. I know you'll probably have an eye on your phone at the moment as we speak, in case you never know.
I keep looking down at my phone here on the left-hand side, so I'm not being rude. It's just making sure. But to be honest, I think from my perspective, there might be one loan deal that happens later this evening. But from my perspective, I've managed to get the pieces of business
done in advance.
Yeah, that I needed to do, so I was lucky. But I've had a lot of hectic moments on transfer deadline days previously where I'm at training grounds at midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, because you're trying to get a deal done in time, and they have to submit, without boring everyone to death, you have to submit the sheet to the FA, depending on what the cut-off point is. So you can sometimes see that, and you get a leeway. You can give like a document that gives you an extra hour on top of that. So it can be quite complicated, and I thank God I'm not a secretary at a club, because if you've got 2 or 3 deals, the amount of paperwork and contracts and everything that's going on, it is crazy.
Have you got any funny stories or interesting stories of a deal which has been a little bit nervy on your side, where you've been a little bit panicking if it's going to go through, if it's not going to go through?
I think, Jay, from my perspective, I think because I care about my players so much, I think I get very emotionally attached to the deal, and I know that I'm trying to do my best for the player, and the players are putting their trust and faith in me to be able to do a good job for them. So I think, from my perspective, with deals, I don't really ever enjoy them, to be honest, because I feel so much pressure, and I take that pressure on, and maybe it's something that I need to look at moving forward, because I think it can impact my life quite considerably, and I've got an amazing family. Like, my family is incredible. My mum, my dad, my brother and sister, and even the wider family are all incredible. My friends, I've got a great set of friends, and they all know during these periods of time, during transfer windows, that I'm not going to be sleeping. I'm not going to be on great form. I'm probably not going to be communicating too much with them. And I'm lucky that they understand that those 2 periods of the year, that they still love and support me, and understand that that's a period of time where I'm not going to be at my best. So yeah, as a fun, and without sounding miserable, I don't really ever enjoy. I enjoy the negotiation side of the deal, so I love negotiating, and I love being fair with negotiation and finding a common ground, because I think everyone that takes part in a deal, everyone should walk away from that deal thinking that they've had a fair go at it, and everyone comes away relatively happy. So I love the negotiation side of it, but as the actual process, I think it's probably something I need to work on in the future, because I get too emotionally attached and too involved.
I think that's a really interesting point, and it is quite nice to see, because I've read a few articles in the Athletic, and some agents don't have as such a nice approach as you do. They kind of see players more as assets rather than human beings, and I think for me this is why agents sometimes get a bad image for people who don't really know the role as such.
Yeah, well, there's a few different ways I could answer that. I think there are some agents out there that they would sell their own mum for the right price. I genuinely believe that. But there are some good guys out there. But I think I definitely saw an area where I could come in and I think it'd have a good response, and I think it has had a good response with how I deal with people and how I am as a person to deal with. But I would say this: if you walked into a huge insurance firm, huge insurance company, and there's 500 people in there, there'd be 10% of the people that are probably horrible, that aren't great humans, that aren't that nice, aren't that friendly, haven't got too many morals, would stitch people up if they could. But so the agents world's no different. I think there's maybe a higher percentage, but there are some good people out there. But I just think I just prefer to keep my network close, the people that I trust, people that I get on well with. And I always prefer to focus on the good people in life as opposed to the bad.
I think that's a great way to look at things, because there's so many negative influences in life, and to focus on the positives is the best way moving forward. I know a lot of people, when speaking about agents and transfer deals, they'd like to know how commission works. Would you be able to explain that?
Yeah, as an industry standard, it's normally 5% of the playing contract. So that's kind of an industry standard. You can obviously try to negotiate more. So it wouldn't be unheard of to get 10%. So depending on the deal, depending on the level, you could get 10% of the whole playing contract. I think people see the Pogba, the Mino Raiola agent, George Mendes, and they think that's the norm. Whereas if you think, I look after players from the very top of the game down to League Two. And obviously I put the same amount of work into a player that I represent in League Two that's going to earn me a fraction of what the player at the top of the game is. But I like to treat everyone the same and do my best for everyone, knowing that it's good karma and that's how I want to operate. But I think when people see the Pogba deal and they see the agent get paid, I think it was 26 million, and they think that every deal is like that and all agents are getting that. And yeah, do I think it's maybe a little bit ridiculous? Yeah, if I'm being honest. I think at that level, I think that's an obscene amount of money, and I don't know how you can really justify that. I think when some of the deals are done, I think, yeah, I've earned a good amount from it, but God, I have really worked for it. And I think people, because football's such a popular game, people obsess over maybe agents and what they earn. But I think other industries, like, no one complains about Hollywood actresses and actors and what they're, and then they're sometimes taking 20%. Well, I think their industry standard's 20%. So if you've got a Hollywood actor who's earning 10 million for a film, their agent's taking 2 million from that deal. So I think just because the popularity of the game, I think people focus on that, but that isn't the norm.
I think that's a really great answer, and it's a really good point as well that people don't really note of the Hollywood actors and actresses like the Margot Robbies, the Will Smiths of the world. Their agents will be earning a large sum of money for the film appearances they're in. I think an interesting question, having heard the stories about your Sky Sports work and your agent work, to cross over now, how much of an influence do you think agents have on the media?
I think it's important. Like, I build good relationships with people within the media. I think it's important to have those relationships because, for a number of reasons, I think sometimes the club please don't be naive at home and think, or if you're in your car driving listening to this, please don't be naive and think that the clubs are squeaky clean and they're doing everything morally correct and how they should be. I promise you, if agents didn't exist for players would be stitched up left, right, and centre. Believe me, trust me. So there has to be a place for agents. Agents should exist. And I think with the relationship with the media is vital, because sometimes things can be leaked from the club to suit the club's agenda. So I think it's important, well, from my perspective, and it was my prerogative to make sure, obviously I had a media background, so I knew how important a role the media play. And I thought that it was vital for me to have good relationships with people in digital media, in print media, and on television.
Do you think the agents have a bit of an impact on rumours that go out in the media to maybe start an auction?
Yeah, 100% it goes on. I would say, in Sky's defence, and I can speak wholeheartedly with this, Sky, whenever they get a story from an agent or from a source, they have to now double check with both clubs. I know there's a recent example of a couple of things that are going on at Crystal Palace where maybe those checks weren't as regimented as they should have been. But I promise you, 99.5% of the time, if it's on Sky Sports News, it is accurate. Because, yes, the agent might have leaked the story to one of the reporters or someone at Sky, but it has to be checked by both clubs. I think newspapers, different kettle of fish, because they've got pages to fill, column inches to fill. So I think you'll find journalists are more than happy to put stories in newspapers because they know that they've got to fill that space.
That's a really good point. And obviously Sky Sports are a national institute, so they are quite respected and trusted for that way. And I think they are probably the most trusted resource other than the BBC in the United Kingdom when it comes to receiving sport news. And I think for my next question, it's important to note that in 2020, we've experienced a year like no other. The pandemic has shocked the nation, not just in terms of sport, but in terms of general life. And for me, in terms of a football agent point of view, how has it impacted the work that you do?
Yeah, I think it's had a huge impact. I think we'll find out later tonight, but I'm 100% convinced that spend will be down in all four divisions: Premier League, Championship, League One and League Two. And that's because clubs aren't going to risk their financial security or jeopardise their financial security any further than it already is, because there's a lot of clubs struggling, whilst crowds aren't allowed to return. I think you just wouldn't do it. Like I was gutted that crowds weren't able to return. Like I know the few pilot events went ahead, and it was going to be, I think this weekend was going to be the first weekend where small crowds were going to be able to return. And I think that was a devastating blow for football. I can't understand how the government can put some rules in place where you can do things, but being in an open crowd when you've got a 20,000 seat stadium and you're sat 5-10 seats away from the next person, how that can be causing any harm. But anyway, from a football perspective, I think it's impacted. I feel sorry for free agents that would normally get signed but haven't, because clubs haven't got the finances to do it and won't risk anything any further. So I think that's had an impact. And then I think from a mental health aspect, I think I tried to be super aware when my players are in lockdown to keep them motivated, to try and keep them mentally stimulated, to talk them through that there will be better days, will return, this won't last forever. Because footballers, like all human beings, but especially footballers, are used to exactly set routine and how they live their life, and it's done to a regimented time. So when that process is taken away and you haven't got control over what your routine is going to be, I was super aware of how their mental health would be. So I'd like to think that I made sure that I communicated with all of them on a weekly basis at the very least, normally twice a week, and kept in touch with them. And that was something that massively concerned me, was the mental health aspect. And I'm always aware of all my players' mental health at all times, because players can go through long periods of being injured. They can feel isolated. They can have the pressures of obviously big crowds, and maybe they're not performing as well as they can. So I always try to speak to my players and have deep conversations with them about mental health and experiences that I've had of mental health over the last 15-20 years.
I think that's an excellent point, especially on the mental health route, because it's so important to speak about it. 1 in 4 people in the United Kingdom are affected, and it is really nice to hear that you are looking out for your players from that point of view. And it's almost like providing a bit of a, I know you probably won't like me saying this, but a bit of a father figure almost, that kind of relationship with your players.
Yeah, you have to play various roles. I think I don't have children at the moment, but I think it will stand me in good stead for having children later on in life, because at one moment you're playing a father figure, one moment it's a friend, one moment it's an advisor, one moment you're having to come down hard on them. So you're playing lots and lots of different roles, and it's knowing when the player needs what role and how you act with them and how you interact with them, and when's the right time to give them a little bit of a rollicking when I think they could be doing better, when's the right time to give them a pat on the back. So you're always learning, and I think hopefully, and hopefully the boys would say this too, I think I normally strike the right balance.
That's really good to hear. And I think staying on the COVID route, what's life like in this current climate for free agents? Because obviously they're without a club at a time where clubs, like you say, are quite concerned about the financial security. I know a lot of clubs in the lower leagues do risk entering administration like Wigan have, because it's no secret that without fans attending games, there's no income, there's no ticket sales, there's no pies being sold. I mean, pies is the biggest seller in Wigan, as we all know from the outside looking in. And as well, it's interesting you say that people sitting five meters apart at games, 2 meters apart, it wouldn't really impact much. Trolls would say Wigan Athletic fans have been social distancing for years. You never know.
Well, I love the Wigan fans, and I should give a quick shout out to Anne Foster, who kindly put us in touch, and she's a huge Wigan supporter, and the whole Foster family are. And I met Anne through Anne's daughter Helen, who I worked with at Sky Sports, and who's still a great friend of mine now. So big shout out to the Foster family.
Absolutely.
But just on the free agents, yeah, as I alluded to earlier, yeah, I worry for free agents. I'm lucky that I haven't got any free agents. I managed to secure contracts for all of my boys. But I do fear, I said to my players, like, if we get a contract, yeah, it might not be what we would have got 6, 12 months ago, but let's take it. It's better to have something than nothing. So, yeah, I fear for the guys that are out of work and trying to find clubs, and I don't think they will find clubs until crowds return in some sort of form. So they might have to go 3-6 months without having a club,
which is never nice to see. And it's obviously probably important during that period that the players stay fit and obviously keep looking for the opportunities if they do come about. I know there's a lot of free agents at the moment. And to almost end the podcast, it's been absolutely fascinating. It's been a pleasure to have you on, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it. But
thanks. Me too.
With your close connection to Wigan Athletic, you've obviously seen what's happened over the last 3 months with the administration. Obviously, with your relationship with Paul Cook, how do you reflect on that?
Oh, desperately sad. Desperately sad. I was absolutely gutted. I've obviously gone to watch a lot of Wigan games. I think it's a fantastic football club, fantastic people behind the scenes that I had the privilege and pleasure of spending time with. And I just couldn't believe it when I heard. I just couldn't believe it. How that's been able to happen, or how that's been allowed to happen, is just beyond me. I've never known anything like it, and I hope that I never know anything like it and it never happens again. But I just felt so sorry for the fans. I felt so sorry for the playing staff. I felt so sorry for the players. I felt so sorry for the backroom staff. And just, even with the points deduction, they did absolutely everything. And I was obviously probably in daily contact with Paul and on the roller coaster with him, and just how fantastic they've been on the pitch since January. I mean, their record was phenomenal since January, just incredible. And it just, Paul had tried to put a lot of pieces of the jigsaw puzzle together in his recruitment, and his recruitment's fantastic. The players that have gone in this summer, if the club hadn't been in administration, they'd have probably got 20 million, maybe even more than 20 million in transfer fees for 25 million. So for the outlay that they brought the players in, it shows how shrewd Paul was in the transfer market as well. But just bitterly sad. And I know, and I don't want to speak out of turn because I think Paul has mentioned this in a couple of his interviews, but I could see the impact that it had. I know it had an impact on everyone, but the huge impact it had on Paul, because he's just a great character and a great personality and a real people person. And I think it deeply impacted him that obviously there's so many people were made redundant. And I think it showed the class of the man that he rang those individuals that had been made redundant to send his love and support. And it was just bitterly sad, but I'm just praying for good times that are around the corner for Wigan. And hopefully the new ownership goes through with the Spanish owners. And I hope stability returns. Obviously, the club are debt-free now, I believe. So it's a good proposition for someone taking over. And I just wish Wigan Athletic all the best moving forward.
That's really nice, and thank you for saying that. And with Paul Cook, you're spot on about his personality. He's one of those people. As soon as he walks in a room, it lights up. Everyone knows. And having met him a few
Jay,
times,
I'll tell you something, mate. Just to bump in, I only knew Paul from the Leo deal. Like I've never met him before. I hadn't even spoken to him before, to be honest. And just I love being in his presence. Like you turn up to the training ground, there's an energy within the building, and trust me, I go to a lot of training grounds, and that's not all. That's very rarely the case. So big personality, big energy, and I think you could see how much the players loved him. And there were players that were out of contract at the end of the season, and they carried on playing where that didn't happen at other clubs. Obviously, you've got the example of Lyle Taylor at Charlton, whereas everyone at Wigan carried on playing. And I think that shows you the environment that was at Wigan and the camaraderie between all the players and the playing staff, and just how that manifested itself.
absolutely. And you mentioned with the players that departed, if it were in the administration climate, they would have gone for around 20 to 25 million. I think we've seen 14 players depart for around 8 million, probably around that figure. I've not done the maths, to be honest. It's just a bit of an estimate. Do you believe that the current climate of coronavirus has also impacted the administration with the fees?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, because if you walked into a shop and a coat that was previously on sale for £100 you can now get for £20, you're going to pay £20, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
I know that's horrible to maybe hear, but that is the reality of life. If you know you can get something for a knockdown price, you're going to pay the knockdown price. So yeah, sadly, please don't. Let's not get into the administrators, because I just think, and I don't want to say anything that's out of turn, but I just would ask the question instead of making a statement that could maybe get me in trouble. But ask the question: how can the administrators at Wigan justify the administrators' fee that the club have had to dish out? I just, it's beyond me. I mean, anyway, I'll leave people to make their own minds up on that. But these same people have got a history of this, and I think there's a lot of questions that need to be answered once hopefully the move's gone through, and how clubs and maybe how the FA and different organisations learn from what's happened with Wigan.
Absolutely. And I just hope this could be a bit of a turning point for other clubs now, for people to take action to protect this happening ever again. And I think my final question of this podcast would be, how do you think now the Football Authority should approach the coronavirus pandemic in terms of making sure other football clubs don't risk going on out of business?
I think my belief in life is the people that are more privileged should be able to help the less privileged. That's been the way that I've been brought up since I was a child. And if you're fortunate to be able to give to others that need it, that should be the case. Now, listen, the Premier League, the individual clubs are their own businesses, and they've obviously had a big impact in the revenue that's come in, because they'd have huge 60,000 season ticket holders, 70,000 season ticket holders, and the revenue that brings in from match days on food, etc., and all the things that come off the back of it. They've been impacted too. So it's quite easy to say, oh, well, the Premier League, they should just think. But I think there should be some help from the Premier League. I think that there should be a resolution that suits all parties, where they give a helping hand. I think what makes English football and the football that's played in England and the league system and the pyramid, it makes it the most beautiful country to watch football at. You can get 15, 16,000 Bradford season ticket holders that are in the 4th division. I mean, that is incredible. And if they got promoted, they'd have 30,000 season ticket holders. So I just think it makes this country like the most beautiful country in the world for football. And I hope that there is a resolution, because I do fear for clubs and that they will go out of business if a common ground isn't found.
I actually agree, and it's so important that towns and communities have their football club, because we've seen at Bury, I know they've got a bit of a reformation now with AFC Bury. They've had the first league game, which they won at the weekend, but it just shows that if a football club does go out of business, it has a real knock-on effect on the town, on the community. The one thing that this administration has actually taught me is never to take your football club for granted, because in life you kind of don't really think about things like this happening until it actually happens. You never expect it to happen to your club before it does. And I think the one thing that it's taught a lot of fans is that cherish every moment you've got supporting your football club, because you never know when it might not be around.
Yeah, 100%, Jay. Like, I think we're so lucky to have our football clubs and the work that they do in the community, how much they mean to the fan base and I just, yeah, everyone. And I think football fans, and I know that when Wigan fans set up their fundraising, I donated, and I know a lot of my friends donated, and I think it was having a bigger understanding, looking at the bigger picture, and thinking we're all in this together. Every football fan needs Wigan to survive, and like we need every club to survive. So I think you're completely right. I think you have a newfound gratitude for the things that are important to you in life, and obviously the team that you support, and in your case, Wigan, is a huge part of that.
It's absolutely the case. Dougie, it's been an absolutely fantastic hour with you.
Dave, the pleasure has been all mine, mate. I've absolutely loved this. You're a fantastic man. I wish you all the best in the future and every success in the world, mate. I've really enjoyed this. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for being an outstanding guest, and I hope a lot of people have taken a lot away from this, because it's been a great insight in the worlds of Sky Sports in journalism. I know a lot of students will take your advice into consideration without a doubt. And the stories about being a football agent and what it actually comes down to has been really important too, because there's a lot of common misconceptions when you come to agents, when you think of the Minolas and the George Mendes, and it's nice to see a different perspective. You've been outstanding, and thanks so much for coming on the podcast. I'd like to thank everyone for watching today, and it's been great. Dougie, have you got anything else you'd like to say before the podcast comes to its end?
Jay, I'd just like to say how much I enjoyed it again, mate. And I hope I haven't bored everyone to death. I hope people can take something from it. And if not, I hope it helps you get to sleep.
I don't think that'll be the case. And I think the one thing that people have definitely learned is, if you're ever in a situation with the police, get a job at Sky Sports, you'll get out of it.
Well, at least they've learned something. Thanks, mate.
Thank you very much.
Cheers, mate.